All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for our September resource group for Start a Brewery. Super psyched to have Larry Chase with us today of the Great Game of Business, and I'm really looking forward to learning a lot. We have a couple of housekeeping pieces just to go over in terms of format so you know what to expect. We are going to just do a quick review of our mission at Start a Brewery, and then we'll thank our sponsor and we'll turn it over to our contributor spotlight and learn more about Larry and hear some of his stories. And then we'll take questions. Larry has said he's happy to take questions as we go and just keep this an interactive discussion. And then afterwards we can open up to storytelling or other questions, just take it wherever it goes. So very briefly, our mission at Start a Brewery is to raise the bar. Oh, and Dustin's coming too. Excellent. To raise the bar for startups and open breweries through education, and to lower the barrier to entry for those who don't see a path towards living their dream. So all in all, just really building that educational resource and providing information in as many ways as we can. We have a couple of things coming up to put on your calendars. November 15th is going to be our fourth quarter educational webinar. Fred Kaplan from Stony Hill Advisors is going to talk about considerations before you purchase a brewery. There's been a lot of talk lately about people purchasing existing breweries, so going to dig into that. Podcast wise, we had a new podcast, episode 19, land yesterday. Still into the building your business plan zone. This one is getting into the numbers, and it turned into a two-parter. It was not scheduled as a two-parter with Carrie Shumway and Audrey Gazunas. That's a big thank you to All About Beer for helping us with our podcast and partnering in that mission. And I was remiss, the Craft Beer Professionals crew with Andrew partners with us on those educational webinars, so appreciating their support as well. And the second part of that podcast is going to land on September 26th. So a really good in-depth how to think about those numbers when you're starting your business plan world. And then last, our next October resource group is going to be with Andy Hooper of Barnum Mechanical, and that's going to be October 18th. And that, like today's mission, is sponsored by White Labs. So to that point, since Neva is not able to join us today, White Labs, whitelabs.com, has been in the industry for such a long time. They have really built an enormous educational resource in addition to providing new strains of yeast, and they have started launching more dry yeast options in addition to their liquid yeast solution. So I would suggest anybody who's brewing to check out their educational opportunities as well as their options in the different yeast program world. So Larry, let's get into it. So let's start our contributor spotlight. First of all, let's hear who you are and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do when you're not working.
So you already gave my name. Larry Chase is hanging out there on my screen as well that you can see. I live in Missoula, Montana. I was just telling Ben before that we started that I was in Southern Oregon for about 11 years. And what do I do now? And it's one of the reasons we moved to Missoula is partly I'm competing for Dog Dad of the Year. The cool thing is that there are only two that are voting, so I might have an in. But part of that is that we get out and we're hiking in the great beauty that Missoula is twice a day. We live probably 300 yards from the Clark Fork River. There's a great city park there, so every morning we can be down walking a quarter mile along the river, seeing the wildlife. I can jump in our Jeep and within 5 or 10 minutes be at probably 20 different trailheads, and we're hiking up into the mountains and the hills and overseeing the Missoula Valley. So if you ask me, that's what do I do when I'm not doing what I, day to day, it's Dog Dad of the Year. That's what I'm shooting for, getting out with my kids, as we call them.
Nice. Very cool. So for clients specifically, what do you do and kind of what problems do you solve, and how much is that in beer world and how much is that in bigger world?
Sure. So I was a brewer for 23 years, mostly all in brew pubs. Hence, I want to still serve the brewing industry because I love that industry. And so what do I do now that I'm not hands-on day-to-day brewing? Well, when you ask the question, what problem do I solve? it's probably a case of when owners are starting, they feel the burden that they are carrying the load of the company and what that means on solely on their shoulders. And they've got just this heavy weight that they feel. That's when I can help them remove some of that burden and remove some of that weight and really spread it out around to the rest of their team and all of their employees. There's probably two ways that we do that. One is we really help educate employees about the business, right? How hard is it to make money in business? And especially if you're a brewery, it's hard to make money out there. And we really help educate employees about that so that they begin to have a direct line of sight to how what they do every day in their role, the decisions they're making, the actions that they're taking, they have that direct line of sight to how that all impacts the success of the business, and especially the financial success of the business. And then, through that, we really help increase engagement with everybody in the company. And that increased engagement leads to lower turnover. You get better financial results. You build a healthier company culture. And so I got two stories about that. There's a client that I worked with out in the Northwest, Pacific Northwest, and their flagship beer is really geared towards St. Patty's Day. That's when it sells extremely well. So their first quarter of the year is awesome. It is their best quarter of the year. Well, then what happens in Q2? It's their crappiest quarter of the year. And for the longest time, the brewery owner, maybe one or two others, knew this, but they were always sweating the details about the second quarter and how awful it is and how crappy it is. And once we came in and started implementing this financial transparency and engaging employees to them to understand this, I remember him telling me that, oh my gosh, all of a sudden he realized that he didn't have to shoulder that Q2 crappiness by himself, which is what he had been doing for years. Now, the rest of his team understood what it was about, and they could take actions and they could share the responsibility of, well, what can we do? We know it's going to be crappy because that's the way it is. And what can we do to improve it? So that's one example. A brewery that I'm working with right now, in the middle of putting in this system and operating system for them. It was probably a month or so ago. I was asking people that I was working with, how were they feeling about where we were at? I remember him sharing that two things. One, that ever since he opened the brewery, and they've been around for about 8 or 9, 10 years, he's tried to figure out how to get what's in his head to all of his employees. And through the process that we're putting together, he's finally figuring out how to do that. And he said, I'm going to read the quote because it was so good. He says, I have I have an increasing sense that I don't have to do it all by myself. Now, granted, he had a team that was, out there brewing, and he wasn't necessarily on the brew deck. For him, though, it was that bigger picture of that financial pressure of thinking that he was the one that had to do it all. And now he gets to share that responsibility, and the people around him are empowered. So that's what I help solve for companies. And it doesn't have to be breweries. One of the questions that because takes place in all kinds of industries, but one of the questions people say, well, will it work for my company? And I just don't think it will. And the answer to that is, well, does your company have an income statement, a profit and loss statement? And if they're a business, the answer is going to be yes. And so the response is that, well, then yes, this will work in your company.
Nice. Very cool. So tell us the story that led you to beer and then to Great Game of Business, because it sounds like one has shaped the other in some ways.
Yeah, they've certainly shaped each other. The story that led me to beer, I didn't drink beer in college, didn't like the mass macro produced lagers that were out there. I went to seminary. I was going to be a Lutheran minister, and it was at seminary where I learned about flavorful beer. I always joke that I partied more in seminary than I did in college. Yet the best theological discussions always took place over a beer at the bar on a Wednesday night. I remember going to a house party, and there was some beer out there, and I opened up the fridge at this house, and I looked in, and what was in there, I had never heard of it before. It was this beer called Pete's Wicked Ale. Huh. Well, let me see that. So I pulled it out, popped the cap, took a swig, and my eyes were like, oh my gosh, what is this? And it was really one of my first experiences of tasting beer with this huge flavor profile that I had never experienced before. I know Sierra Nevada Pale Ale was another one of those. So with this new eye of flavor, I began searching out flavor. I only lasted at seminary for a year. I joke that I decided to go to my higher calling, that is brewing beer. I didn't get there right away. I wanted to travel Europe, so I did that, drank beer and discovered beer all over Europe, got back to the States, spent 4 months driving to see friends and family around the country, exploring these small breweries and brew pubs. And when I was all done, what am I going to do? And I realized I want to brew beer. I don't know how I'm going to do it. And this is about 1997. So it's about the only internet was America Online. There really wasn't a lot of way to search for information online. So I just started going into the breweries that I knew of in the areas that I'd lived, and started asking to talk to the brewer, asking them informational interview questions like, what's it take to be a brewer? What do you have to know? What's a day in the brewery like? And it was one of those conversations that the brewer looked at me and said, would you be interested in a job? Well, heck yeah. So I landed my first part-time brewing job. He told me later he in part hired me because I was interested, and two, I'd had previous bartending experience, so I could do both, right? Get full-time. And that led to a full-time head brewer position at a new brewery and then, that was in 97, 98 when I started, did the American Brewers Guild course, got heavily involved with the Brewers Association, and served on a whole bunch of different committees there. And so throughout this whole process, Laura, you asked, how does that financial piece come in? Well, I've loved financials my entire life. Even as a kid, I can remember making up these little play checks and checkbooks. And every organization that I think I've ever been a part of, I've always ended up being the treasurer. So that's that financial piece. Had a real interest in investing, so a lot of self-learning about what is, if you're going to invest in a company, you got to understand their P&L, balance sheet, cash flow statement. So learned that way. And then in my roles as head brewer, I was often at management level, so I'd usually see an income statement. Doesn't necessarily mean I 100% understood it, or they were teaching us about it. And it was in 2006 at the Austin Craft Brewers Conference. Went to a seminar because it sounded interesting. Was on open book management. It was led by Kim Jordan, New Belgium Brewing, Wynn Odell from Odell, and Marcy, who was with Alaska Brewing. It was my first introduction to what financial transparency can be to an organization. And later on, I picked up the book, The Great Game of Business by Jack Stack, and I just started learning more. And when I left hands-on day-to-day brewing back in 2018, not sure really what I wanted to do, started working with a career coach. And it was that work and that conversation that led me down the path to, this is how I want to help the brewing industry now. I want to tap into my love of numbers in order to teach people business and business literacy and financial literacy. I came I've experienced both healthy organizations in my work career as well as very unhealthy, sometimes you might even say toxic organizations. This work that we do with companies helps build a healthy organization. And we'll get to that a little bit too when I talk about trust. And so it really taps into my love of beer, the industry, my long-term interest of financials, and that desire to create healthy organizations for people. So that's probably the medium length story there.
Nice. No, I appreciate how it all came together. That's really interesting, and a lot of parallels in my own universe. So what are some of the, I'm sure you've had some really cool projects that you've worked on. I mean, the whole thing feels like it would be very rewarding for you personally. So what's it from your perspective, what's the coolest project you've worked on in this great game of business world?
Oh, great game of business world as
Or
opposed to
you
the
can do
brewery
beer if you
world.
prefer. Your choice.
I'm new enough. I mean, I've been at this for a couple of years now with helping companies. Yet it's like any new business, it's a slow build. I'm going to talk. I mean, I won't call it a cool project, but the coolness, like my current client, is seeing the transformation in people and seeing them learn things that they never knew before about how the business really makes money and how hard it is and the expenses that they didn't realize were there. And that aha moment that goes on. And then they are figuring out, well, how can I change that? How can I improve that? How can I be the one that impacts this to be better? That is pretty cool.
That's pretty cool.
On the brewery side, that I didn't necessarily think it was cool initially, but it turned out to be pretty fascinating work as we figured it out along the way. My second head brewing job was with Granite City Food and Brewery. They were a brew pub chain based out of Minneapolis. I started at their second location in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. What their model was and what we developed was to build a central wort production facility. Ben, you and I were talking about my time in Iowa. That was one of them. We moved to Ames, Iowa, because we put that central wort production facility, a little tiny town 20 miles north of Ellsworth. So what we did is we brewed the wort in that central facility. We shipped that wort in custom built tanker trucks to the outlying brew pubs. And at the brew pubs, they had fermenters and a cellar with all the serving tanks. And when I left, I think, Sioux Falls was store number 2. We opened the wort house, as we called it, I think by the time we were opening store number 6. So we were brewing wort and shipping it out of this little brew pub in Sioux Falls. That was a lot of learning there. When I left, I think it was 2009, there were 26 locations and we were brewing and shipping 16,000 barrels of wort a year to those 26 locations. So lots of learning to go on around that. And I know that after I left, they improved it even more in some of the things that I had some conversations, after I left. So it was a pretty cool project over the 8 or 9 years that I was with them.
Is that a model that is used in other places?
Probably not that specific model. I know there's definitely a handful, there's quite a few breweries out there that are, like there's one outside of Eugene, Ale Song, that does all barrel aged beers. And they brew the wort at another brewery in town, and then they ship the wort to their fermentation and cellaring facility, and then finish out the product. But in terms of shipping wort to a brew pub that has their own tanks, I don't know.
That's intriguing. That's intriguing. Very cool. And very cool. And that very much answered the question on lots of levels. How about most complex or problematic? I don't know if you want to get into great game there, if you just want to talk about beer, but complex and problematic seems to me like that would be the definition of pretty much anything you walk into, being
Sure.
complex.
Yeah, I mean, the building out the financial transparency model and operating system within a brewery is not complex because, well, let's just say it's not complicated, because the difference between complex and complicated means that there's all these pieces and you don't know what's where and it's just a jumble. That's kind of how I view it. We've got a set system for how you set this up and set it up over time so that you're doing it step by step by step, and not overwhelming people. Probably the complexity comes in when you are now teaching people and people are having to learn a new thing. It's change. You're bringing pretty significant change to an organization that hasn't maybe thought this way before. So that can be complex. I was thinking earlier too, Laura, you and I were talking before we kicked off here about the Brewpub server training manual. That when I was on the Brewpubs committee, with I think you too, a whole bunch of other people, we were involved in developing that and essentially writing it. That was complex because we had so many different ideas and opinions and thoughts. How should this be organized? Who are the primary writers? How do we get this edited? What do we include? What do we not include? And as you shared, it's a resource from the Brewers Association that's still out there and people are still using it. So thanks for sharing that information, because I think we did that, it's 10 years ago now, at least. And so that felt pretty complex. On the financial side, remember I said that I always end up being treasurer of all the organizations I'm a member of. I was a board member for the VA for 8 years. And for 5 of those years, what role did I serve?
Finance committee.
Treasurer. Yeah. And as a part of that, I chaired the finance committee, and the complex project, it was a challenging one because I'd never done anything like it before, is that the BA has some reserve money that had been built up over time, and we felt it was very prudent to invest it well, for the safety of the organization and for things down the road. So I was involved in a project that we had an investment policy statement early on. I helped lead a project that we rewrote and updated the investment policy statement. And that was a whole bunch of new learning and can be complex as well because there's a lot of moving pieces in there. And then from that, we went and did a thorough all hands on deck request for proposal to find a new investment advisor. And when you've got, I think, we ended up having 10 people, 10 organizations submit. There's about 8 or 9, 10 people on the committee. So there's lots of opinions. There's a lot of ways to sort through that material. Felt really good where we came out, because at the end of that, when we were getting on the call to make the decision of who we were going to work with, before that call, I decided to text everybody and send me who is their choice, because they've already been thinking about this. And so that we had an idea going into the call. That was probably the easy of all that complexity ahead of time. It was probably the easiest call we ever had, because of every text that came back in, it was overwhelmingly for one particular vendor. And I think I will say 10 people on the committee, literally 9 out of 10 picked the same vendor, and they all picked it of their own accord. There wasn't any groupthink on that call. They already knew who they wanted and they had their reasons. So that was a pretty complex project, and that gets a little bit at that financial piece too, that is of interest to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Funny, what came to mind when you were talking about like sharing and teaching all of the staff members in an organization kind of a new way of thinking and a new way of doing things. It made me feel like you probably need to teach it several different ways, because people learn in different ways. And it seemed like kind of the inverse of our Brewpub server training manual process, where everybody sent their stuff in and had to be sorted out. this is the teaching of all the different ways to get the stuff out in the same direction. I don't know. It was just one of those things that popped into my head.
Right. Your point about teaching people. I learned this when I was a brew pub brewer and doing server training. What I learned is that the best way to teach and to train and to help people is to do small bites repetitively over a really long time.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you start to get that's how people start to retain the information. It's how they begin to remember it. It's how they can then apply it, because it's that repetitiveness. And so it's the same thing we do when we are teaching financial literacy, business literacy. And how do we go about, how does this company make money? It's consistent, it's small bites, and it's never ending. You're just constantly doing it.
You take where you started and add a little bit more,
Yeah. And then make sure you go back and revisit things you talked about previously, because you probably forgot some of it.
Yes, exactly. Okay, well, let's get into your best practices, tips and tricks. Where do you want to take us?
Sure. So you'd asked about this, and I was thinking about what's a tip or trick in terms of how do you build that healthy organization and using it through financial transparency. And if you might have heard of a guy by the name of Patrick Lencioni. He is an organizational development, healthy organizations is his thing. He's got a book out there called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And the bottom layer, that base layer dysfunction, is lack of trust. When organizations lack trust, everything else is out the door, and from his perspective. And so it's really important to build trust in an organization. So how do you do that? Well, there's a lot of different sources out there that can tell you what goes into trust. One that I like and recently learned about, I don't remember the name off the top of my head. I can look it up. But there's 4 things that go into building trust. So I'm going to talk about those 4 things, and then how financial transparency works within that realm to build trust within an organization. So the first one is credibility. You've got to have credibility in order to build trust. And one component of that credibility is, how truthful are you? Right? If you're not truthful, you're going to lose credibility. So in terms of that truthfulness and that credibility, when you as an owner, CEO, leader of a company start to reveal financial numbers to your employees that are usually, often in most of America, held close to the vest, and not a lot is talked about, all of a sudden you're telling them, here's what's true. Here's how hard it is to make money in business, in our business. And then it's more than just revealing those numbers, though. You got to teach people about them. You can't simply say, well, here's the numbers, do with them what you will. It would be no different than saying, well, here's the brew deck, here's the malt, here's the hops, go brew. Huh? How do I do that? So you got to take that additional step beyond revealing the numbers. You got to teach the numbers. And when you really start to show the reality of how hard it is to make money, and you start to share that openness, well, that's what really begins to build credibility, because of that truthfulness that you're sharing with people. So credibility is that first piece of building trust. A second piece is reliability. And a way you can think about that is, how consistent are you in showing up all the time? And one of the things that we do with the financial transparency and how we operate it and put the system into place is that there are regular weekly huddles where the company scoreboard, and the scoreboard is most often a company's income statement, P&L statement. It's usually much reduced. You might look at a QuickBooks or your accounting software, and you've got 100 accounts, right, in your system. We narrow that down, and we combine a whole lot of things, and we roll things up so that you may only have 20, 25 lines of a P&L. But we are regularly looking at that on a weekly basis and having conversations around it. Because it's coming out of there that if we're looking at where we're going to be down the road, then what can we do today to impact that? And reliably doing that and consistently doing that is the way you start to build that trust. Because the moment you skip a week or two or three, now people might start to say, oh, so what are you hiding from us? What do you not want us to know? So keeping that reliability and consistency. I was just at the Great Game of Business conference last week, and I passed through on LinkedIn yesterday a post from one of the companies there that practices the financial transparency open book management piece. And it was a video of them. There were 5 of them at the conference. And it was a video of them showing up to their weekly all company Friday huddle. Now they were all standing there in front of a computer, and then the rest of the huddle was happening at their company back, I think, in Dallas. And it really highlighted that consistency piece, that reliability piece, that doesn't, wherever you're at, make it happen, do it. And that's one way that you help to build that trust. So the third thing is under this model is building trust is what you might consider to be called professional intimacy. And that really gets at the human side of who we are. And one way to think about that is vulnerability. Because really, vulnerability is one of those currencies of exchange for acquiring trust with people. And when you think about what is it like to be vulnerable, well, a lot of owners are afraid to open up their books because they don't look so hot. So that takes vulnerability. It also can be a case of, I don't even really understand the numbers myself. How am I supposed to share this with my team? Right. So that takes some courage and some vulnerability to do that. It's also about being willing to ask for help. My wife is a professional speaker, and she was sharing with me something that she's been using as in what she talks about human connection. And the statistic was something around the lines of what percentage of people are willing to help if asked. And it's a really high percentage. It's like, 90, 95%. And then the opposite question is, how many people will ask for help? Well, it's way on the inverse side. Exactly, Laura. So part of that vulnerability is being willing to ask for help, saying, I don't have all the answers. I don't understand it completely either. And so let's go and learn it together, right? Showing that vulnerability is a great way to build trust through professional intimacy. And that definitely comes out when you start to talk about numbers within a business. So then the fourth thing about building trust in that organization is, what's your self-orientation? Are you focused more on you as the owner, and it's all about me? Or how focused are you on other people? What are your motives when you think about how you show up to work every day? One of the things that we do with this financial transparency piece is we answer the question, what's in it for me? For the employees, because the employees say, well, you're teaching me these things about the numbers, you're showing me the numbers. Yeah, it's hard to make money, but what's in it for me? And so we have systems to reward people. We have ways that we provide them a stake in the outcome that can be an earned profit distribution. And they are the ones who control their destiny. because we're giving them the tools through that, revealing the numbers, teaching them about the numbers, and saying, here's our target. In our world, we call it a critical number that you would focus on for perhaps a year at a time. If we hit this critical number and we go above and beyond that, guess what? You get to share in an earned profit distribution. So there's this motive that it's not all about the owner and the owner raking it in and putting it in their back pocket. It's the owner saying, hey, business is hard. You helped me do this. I'm going to share with you. And here are the opportunities to do it. So with those four things, to really help build trust, it was that credibility piece, sharing and teaching the numbers. It was the reliability piece, being very consistent about doing that on a weekly basis. It's about professional intimacy and being willing to ask for help and say, I don't understand it all either. Let's learn this together. And then finally, what's your self-orientation? What's your motive? And focusing on your people as a way to participate in the success of the business. So those are my 4 tips, pretty involved there, but 4 tips of how to build trust through those 4 different ways. And then the way that the financial transparency can help you do that.
Very cool. Any questions, Ben, Dustin?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, it worked. So yeah, I had a question regarding, you're talking about essentially some sort of profit sharing program with employees. And, in terms of percentages, I know it's going to differ for every organization, but do you have any guidelines for, what like a bonus pool percentage of profit, of net profits might look like?
So it's going to differ for every company, but here's how we think about it and structure it. And we'll just talk about, say your critical number is your profit before tax. That's what your critical number is for the year, because that's the most important thing that your organization needs to accomplish this year. Well, every company has to make a profit to stay in business. What happens is that you set what that profit level is that is going to keep the company healthy, that is going to sustain the company, and that is going to set the company up for success in the future. So that number can be different for every company, depending on the industry you're in, depending on the specific financials that you have running right now. But for sake of argument, let's just say that your profit number is $100,000. You need $100,000. This is probably a much larger company, right? But you need $100,000 because you've got loan payments to make. You've got some investments that you need and some CapEx that you got to do. You've got some other things that are important for growth in order to keep the company viable. So you've got to make $100,000 in profit. So what we then say is that when you go above that $100,000, then it really becomes a gain share. We're going to share, the company is going to share that gain over $100,000 with the employees. So it's not a profit, it's not make $1 profit and all of a sudden employees get to share some of that. It's really setting the company up for what your level of profit is required for the health of the company, and then sharing anything above that. So let's just say great year, you hit that $100,000 critical number, you actually do $125,000. So the company now is going to share $25,000 with employees. When I say share, it means a percentage goes to an employee bonus pool or profit distribution pool, and the other percentage goes to the company. Why do we share it? Well, because if you're doing well like that, there's probably growth things that need to happen And it's important that the company still retains some of that for its future growth and for its future operations. Additionally, if you share it all now, and it starts to become an expectation that employees think that, oh, I should expect to get 100% of this gain share every time. What we recommend for companies just starting out is that they start out at a 33% share to employees, 67% to the company. Over time, as you get more versed in the financial transparency and people understanding it, you can move it up. You can move it up to 40%. You can move it up to 50%, where it's a 50-50 share. It's always easier to add and give a little bit more than it is to take away.
And are you sharing that, for example, 33% number with the team?
There's a lot of different ways to do it. The most common is it's based on a percentage of people's annual wages. It can get a little complicated. That's why there's an Excel spreadsheet, right, to figure this all out. But the back end figuring it out might be slightly complicated. However, if you say that you're going to make at level, say you hit this level 2, you've got 5 levels that you could hit depending on that gain above your critical number. Level 1 could be 1% of your salary. Level 2 could be 2%. Level 3 could be 3% of your salary. So all of a sudden people start to understand that, oh, if we do really, really well and we hit level 5, it's 5% of my salary or my wages for the year. We also take it a step further because people don't think in percentages. They think in dollars, they think in days. I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, yet you look at it, 1%, or I'll say 5% of somebody's salary is often somewhere around 4 to 5 days of work, right? So it might be, think about, you earn a bonus, earned profit distribution of 5% of your wages, and you just got a paid week of work. And so we like to take it down to that level so that people understand it in the terms that they think about it.
So is it a variable how you pay that out? Is it suggested that it be cash, or can it be paid out as paid vacation?
Cash. That's our suggestion. Yeah, definitely. And we usually pay it out too. It's not a one-time payment. We spread it out over the year, because when it happens only once a year, people lose sight. They lose track. It doesn't make sense. So we like to do it quarterly. And the easy way to do it is that you hit your numbers in that first quarter. We're going to pay out 10% of the earned profit distribution for Q1. In Q2, you hit it, we're going to pay out what 20% of the earned profit distribution would be. So it's 10, 20, third quarter is 30, fourth quarter is 40, so that by the end of the year, you hit every quarter, you've now paid out 100% of the earned profit distribution. The cool thing about it is you earn it in Q1, Q2, like that brewery that I mentioned, has a really crappy quarter, you don't hit your numbers, and you miss it, you don't get an earned profit distribution payout. Guess what? You still got 2 more quarters to make that up. You hit your numbers for Q3, guess what? You now get what you missed in Q2, and you get what you got earned in Q3.
So you're not just hitting it once annually, you're hitting it regularly.
Right, because that comes back to, let's focus on the short-term goal. This is the big goal. If we can hit these marks along the way, we'll hit that big term goal. And if we hit those marks along the way, well, let's reward people now for it. Helps keep the motivation. It helps keep people focused. Helps people stay in tune to what their role is and how their line of sight to impacting that number.
So what came to my mind when Ben asked the question originally was whether the company was telling the employees that they weren't paying out 100% over the goal, that they're only paying out 33% over the goal. Are you transparent about that part?
Oh, heck yeah. Yeah, heck yeah. And you then tell employees, well, we've got this gain share pot. Employees, you get 33%, companies getting 67%. And here's what the company's going to do with that 67% of that money. Oh, we grew better than we thought. We need to buy another tank. Guess what? That's how we're going to spend that money. We're going to buy this tank. Oh, we see some issues coming down the road. We really need to build a buffer of cash so that we can handle and those issues that we see coming down the road. So it is going literally right into the savings account so that we have a cash, a bank of cash for some issues that we see coming down the road. All right. Be up. That's the whole financial transparency piece. Let people know what you're doing with it. Totally. And then they'll be totally good. And down the road, employees are partly involved in making those decisions. I say down the road because we can get into some bigger picture planning, longer term strategic thinking that start to involve employees as well. And they can be involved in making those decisions.
Right. It seems like if they were involved in part with what the rest of it was going towards, that at some point they were going to get the new XYZ that they were hoping for that would, be
Sure.
beneficial to them, that would be key. Is there some translation that happens in the process so that, for example, the bartender or the server in the tap room or the brewer on the bottling line, canning line, is there a translation down to which specific cost areas could help to impact that the most, or setting goals that are decision-making points for them individually, where they can see that it's their choices that are making that difference? Does that happen?
Oh, yes, Laura. Yes. In fact, that's one of the things that we focus on during the latter part of implementing this system with the company is, really getting down to that department or that team level and helping them identify the drivers that can impact that bigger picture critical number, the bigger picture scoreboard. Because everybody in some shape or form, a department is going to have an ability to impact it. Whether it is the production team increasing efficiencies in the brew house, right? Increase your efficiency, you lower your costs, lower costs lead to higher gross margin leads to profit. Right? So now they've got that direct line of sight. Same thing with sales team, right? What are they going out and selling higher gross margin products, or is for them, like one of the companies I'm working with right now, the sales team recognized that they need sales because in order to get to a break-even point. And so they've created this 90-day challenge where they're going out and they're looking to hit 60 of the top 100 accounts in their marketplace. When I say hit, it means go out, sales calls, put them into that process, because they know that if they follow this sales process and if they can get to 60 of them, they're going to earn the business of, and I don't know what it is, the number is, but earn that business of a certain percentage of them. And all of a sudden that now brings revenue, sales in, and they know that we need sales to get to a break-even point in hitting our critical number. Same thing with the tap room. It's about sales. It's about customer experience. How do you get repeat customers in? Maybe what you're tracking as a driver is repeat customers and regulars. How often are they coming in? Because you know that really drives business. So maybe they're doing things to help drive that repeat business. And so that's where you take it down to the front lines so that they see how the decisions they're making, the actions they're taking, go directly line of sight to that top level critical number that the company has.
Do you find, or do you recommend that each department pick specific target numbers or line items or approaches and rotate that? Or does everybody kind of come up with their own best way to approach that?
Yeah, they'll come up with their own way because everybody has different issues going on in their company. And the key part is that you understand that whatever driver that we've picked that we're going to focus on and that you're going to put it on a scoreboard too. That's another important piece. Having scoreboards up, visible in front of everybody in a common area that people see regularly so that it's front of mind. I often compare it, you go to any sporting event. If you didn't have a scoreboard hanging there, how would that game go? How would that event go? Right? If the players don't know the score, the coaches don't know the score, what happens? I don't know.
How motivated are they? Right. It reminds me of the thermometer when you were kids and you were
Sure.
raising
Sure.
funds.
Yeah. So everybody's gonna pick their own scoreboards. You can even take it down to an individual level too, right? If you go from the driver, this is what the company's trying to do, and maybe it's increase. Maybe they get canning line and they're looking to increase their filling efficiency. And maybe there's one person on the canning line who has one specific job. And I've never worked a canning line, so I don't know specifically, but I'll take this. Maybe it's the forklift driver bringing pallets of cans over to the depalletizer. One of the early companies I worked with, they started to realize how much an empty can cost. And they were being somewhat careless driving the forklift. So they would smash cans would fall off. Well, what happened to those, right? They all went to the recycle bin. They didn't get filled. Well, when they started to realize the cost of each of those cans, all of a sudden, now you can create a scorecard for the forklift driver of how many pallets of cans do you put on the depalletizer that are defect free? You lost none of them, right?
Right.
All of a sudden, and you now know that this impacts the success of the company, and you've brought it right down to their level.
Well, I'm not done with questions, but we are running out of time, and I do think it's important. I do think it's important to understand not necessarily what your ideal client is, but what is the best kind of position, or how could companies understand that they're ready for this kind of support, and how would they kind of get ready? Is there a way to prepare, or where should you be in order to reach out and say, hey, I think we're in a good place to need some help?
It starts with the leader.
Okay.
Is that the owner? Is that a CEO? Because one of the very first things that we talk about is that it's important to have the right leadership. If leadership is not on board with wanting this to be a part of their operations, it's not going to happen. It's not going to work. Right. So it's really a leader taking a look at themselves and saying, am I prepared to learn? Am I prepared to teach, share, be involved in this financial transparency piece? Do I believe in my people, that they are indeed willing and interested in learning, do I trust them that they can make good decisions if they have this information? Right. So it's asking yourself those questions, and really, do you have the courage to open up and release control? And that can be a really challenging one, because in the American business world, and maybe it's worldwide business world, there's this thing that feels like you're supposed to keep the numbers close. Don't show them to anybody. And so it's stepping past and saying, you see the potential of what's possible. And as an owner, are you feeling overworked by the business? Like you have to do it all. And when I say do it all, like this huge pressure on you to make the numbers, and your people don't really understand you. And like one of my clients said, he's got all this stuff in his head and he couldn't figure out how to get it out of his head so that his employees and his people understood it. And it was through this process that he's now sees that increasing sense that he doesn't have to do it all. He doesn't have to shoulder all of the responsibility and all of the burden.
Right. And he's not the only one that can make a difference on the flip side.
Sure. Yeah, it's probably another question too. How many times have owners or CEOs said, God, I really wish my employees would think and act more like an owner?
Mhm.
Well, this is one, this is a way to help make that happen.
This is a way. All right, awesome. Well, thank you. For those of you who may not be able to see the chat, you can reach Larry at larry.coach, and phone number and all of that stuff, but email is probably best. Yes.
Yeah, Larry.coach. If you go to Larry.coach, it'll take you to my landing page on the Great Game of Business website. A lot more information. There's some free tools, and you can even get a free audio download of the audio version of the Great Game of Business book there as well.
Excellent.
Learn a little bit more. So
Very cool. Well, thank you. Thank you for joining us.
oh,
Thank
it's my
you.
pleasure, Laura. It's always great to see you. Thanks, Ben, for hanging out. Dustin.
So much fun.
Jeff had to drop off early.
Yeah.
It's good to see Jeff again. So
Nice to
thank
see
you
you.
so much for inviting me.
Absolutely. Ben, Dustin, thank you again. Another thanks to White Labs for sponsoring us today, of course, and wishing you all a great afternoon. Thank you so much. I keep learning.
Cheers.
Yes. Cheers.